Good morning, everybody. This is Caitlin Coleman from the Colorado Foundation for Water Education. I'm here with Fiona Smith with the Colorado Water Congress. Thank you for joining us today for part 2 of our Transbasin Diversion webinar series. We're excited to offer this series as a partnership between the Colorado Water Congress and the Colorado Foundation for Water Education. And we're both proud to offer webinars and workshops with benefits to our members in Colorado's water community. You can learn more about the Colorado Water Congress at www.cowatercongress.org and the Colorado Foundation for Water Education at www.yourwatercolorado.org. We have just a couple housekeeping notes before we get started. First off, we'd like to thank our presenters and our members. These presentations are made possible by your support. Secondly, a brief overview of today's webinar, Profiling a Transbasin Diversion, focusing on the Windy Gap Firming Project. We'll begin with a presentation from Jeff Drager of Northern Water, who will discuss the plan for Windy Gap Firming and the participants in our project. Our second speaker, Lurleen Curran, Grand County Manager, will then discuss the permitting processes and negotiations from the county perspective related to the project. Our third speaker, Melly Whiting of Trout Unlimited, we'll talk about opposition to the project and the mitigation measures that were negotiated. If you have questions as attendees, you'll be muted throughout all presentations. But during the presentations, please type any questions into the questions pane in your GoToWebinar toolbar, which should be on the side of your screen. Our presenters will do their best to answer questions throughout the presentation. We will then have 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to address any unanswered questions, which we will read these aloud for presenters to respond. CLE credits will be offered and sent with a link to a recording of the webinar before the end of the week. Those are just offered for this second webinar in the series, not the first one. If you have any technical questions, please email our tech guru, Eric Dorn, at edorn@cowatercongress.org. As you know, probably, transbasin diversions have had a long, changing, and important history redistributing water across Colorado. For our purposes, we're defining transbasin diversions as those water projects that move water across the Continental Divide from one of Colorado's 4 major river basins to another. So moving water between the Platte, Arkansas, Rio Grande, and Colorado River basins, and ultimately changing the course of that water. In Colorado, there are 27 of these that move more than 580,000 acre-feet of water each year. Without further ado, Jeff Drager with Northern Water will start us off. Jeff is the Deputy Manager of the Engineering Division at the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District. He has worked at the district since 1995, where he has also served as Project Manager for the Pleasant Valley Pipeline Project and the Windy Gap Firming Project. Prior to that, he worked for consulting engineering firms in California and Texas. Jeff is a Colorado native with a bachelor's degree from Colorado State University and master's degree from Stanford University. We hope you enjoy today's webinar. Jeff?
Jeff is self-muted.
Okay.
How's that?
Okay, sorry about that. Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk about the Windy Gap Firming Project. And really, Windy Gap Firming Project is the third in a series of transbasin diversions, so I need to start with a little bit of history. I will start by showing you a map of the Colorado Big Thompson Project. This is a federal Bureau of Reclamation project that was constructed beginning in the 1930s through the 1950s. It delivers water from the west slope of the Continental Divide. Really, it's collected in Lake Granby. It is pumped through Shadow Mountain and Grand Lake, and through a tunnel underneath Rocky Mountain National Park. It is ultimately ends up in Carter Lake, where it is delivered to the southern portion of our service area, or in Horsetooth Reservoir, where it's delivered to the northern portion of our service area. So this project, as I said, was finished in the 1950s. Windy Gap project came around about 30 years later. It is shown on the far left of your screen, just a very small pipeline and pump station on that connects to Lake Granby, and I'll show a little blow-up of that. It consists of a 440 acre-foot reservoir that's on the Colorado River, the main stem of the Colorado River, just downstream of the confluence with the Fraser River. It's a large pump station that pumps water through a 6-mile, 9-foot diameter pipeline into Lake Granby. And once that Windy Gap water gets into Lake Granby, it is stored and delivered through the Colorado Big Thompson system to users on the east slope. These projects, when they initially were constructed and conceived, also had their own types of approval processes. And the Colorado Big Thompson project, occurring in the 1930s, was a different process than we have now, but it's still a significant process. This project came about in the 30s during the Depression and Dust Bowl, when it was recognized they needed more water to serve the agriculture that had already been developed in northeastern Colorado. There were a lot of negotiations that occurred between 33 and 38. Near the end of those negotiations, the state legislature passed the Water Conservancy Act. That actually allowed the formation of Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, or Northern Water. And one thing that was unusual for projects at that time, the act also required mitigation for impacts to west slope water supplies. So as part of the Colorado Big Thompson project, one of the main features is Green Mountain Reservoir, which is used to improve water supplies for the west slope, where the water actually comes from. Also, as part of CBT, when Congress authorized construction of the project, there was a document called Senate Document Number 80, which describes the project itself and how it was supposed to operate, including some protections for west slope. And in 1938, Northern Water signed a repayment contract with the Bureau of Reclamation. So a pretty long process there. In 1967, some of the Front Range water providers realized, some of the cities actually, the older established cities, realized they were going to need additional water to serve their growth. Rather than take that water from the CBT project and the agricultural industry, they wanted to build a new project, which they called the Windy Gap Project. At that time, NEPA had been passed, National Environmental Policy Act, so that project went through the NEPA process. There was a 1980 settlement agreement with the west slope primarily, and again, to be in compliance with the Water Conservancy Act, Northern, or the municipal subdistrict of Northern Water, provided funding to the west slope, to the Colorado River District, that was eventually used to build Wolford Mountain Reservoir as mitigation. We also were required to sign a carriage contract with Reclamation that defines the terms and rules for how that water moves through the system. In essence, Windy Gap water could come through the Colorado Big Thompson system whenever there's unused capacity. As I mentioned, these two projects did have some requirements for mitigation, and while there was some recognition of environmental issues back at the time, a lot of the priorities, especially in the 30s, were related to water supply, and that has obviously changed over time. The Windy Gap Firming Project came about after operation of Windy Gap Project from 1985 through into the late 90s. The Windy Gap Project owners and allottees realized that they couldn't rely on that supply every year, because there was not always unused capacity in the Colorado Big Thompson project. So 13 cities and water districts and one power provider that get Windy Gap water came together to build the Windy Gap Firming Project. The project itself really has evolved into a reservoir that we call Chimney Hollow Reservoir on the east slope, immediately to the west of Carter Lake. The project will supply 13 participants who are shown in the map on the lower right corner of this slide. Those 13 participants are responsible for all the costs of the permitting, design, and construction of the project. Now, why do they need the project? This graph kind of shows what the deliveries to those 13 participants would be through the Windy Gap project with existing facilities in place. And as you can see, they vary greatly from a small amount in some dry years to quite a bit of water, over 30,000 acre-feet a year in some of the wetter periods. One thing we noticed was that even in wet years, unlike some water projects, Windy Gap has no water even in wet years, because there's Colorado Big Thompson reservoirs are full and there's no unused capacity for Windy Gap. water supply that varies as much as this does is really not what a municipal water provider needs. They need a firm, reliable water supply that they can count on year in and year out. So the purpose of the Windy Gap Firming Project and the Chuney Hollow Reservoir is to fill in those low spots and kind of flatten out even the high areas and provide a reliable, steady delivery year in and year out. Really improves the efficiency of the diversions, allows them to, with just a little bit more water, plan for quite a bit more of additional growth and water use within their systems. One question about this is how much is this water really needed? What are the demands of those participants? And this graph kind of shows how the water demands of those 13 participants grows over time. And it's very close right now to surpassing the existing water supplies. With the Windy Gap Firming Project, we had almost 30,000 acre-feet of firm yield, but as you can see in this graph, by 2050, those 13 participants are still over 50,000 acre-feet short of water demand or of water supply. Another way to show this is in a pie chart. As an aggregate, the participants will, in 2050, will be short by 30. They will need 34% more water supply to meet their needs, and that additional water supply will be met probably a large amount of that from conservation and some of that from new or additional water sources. That, of course, varies for each participant. We have 13 participants. They're all in different water supply situations. For some of them, by 2050, they'll need an additional 50% water supply. They only really have half of what they'll need by that time. Others, like Broomfield, will only have a shortage of about 20% by 2050. And this graph just really shows a little more detail of the proposal for Windy Gap Firming Project. Is called Chimney Hollow Reservoir. It's a 90,000 acre-foot reservoir immediately to the west of Carter Lake. This kind of shows why we chose this alternative. It's very close to existing Colorado Big Thompson project infrastructure. Very easy to get the water in and out of this project. And we anticipate the cost of this to be roughly $300 million. This is, I think, where some people may have seen parts of this presentation before. Some of you may call this the winding part of the presentation. This is the EIS process as it lays out, the NEPA process. And it seems pretty straightforward. A lot of people say, why does it take so long? This is where I start whining. There are a whole lot of other rules and regulations besides NEPA that need to be taken into account to build a trans-mountain diversion. And this is really what the process ends up looking like. And I guess I don't want to say too much about this other than it's not a very efficient process. I guess maybe one of the good things about this is it provides a lot of opportunity for the project proponent to meet and get to know all of the other stakeholders in the process. And I think you'll hear more from some of them later in this webinar. As a result of that spaghetti mix of processes, Northern Water, the municipal subdistrict of Northern Water, has committed to a significant amount of mitigation and enhancement measures. And I don't plan to go through all of these in detail. I think that Lurleen and Melly may discuss these in a little more detail. I just will show that we have committed mitigation and enhancement measures for out-of-pocket costs of about $19 million right now. That includes water quality mitigation, some stream restoration and improvements, a bypass potentially around Windy Gap Dam to help aquatic habitat and some other items. We've also provided some water supply for Middle Park Water Conservancy District and Grand County. The value of that water supply and the firming up of some water supply that they already had has a value if that were over on the Front Range and that water were brought through to Front Range water users of at least $30 to $50 million. So there's a lot of commitment that have been made in this process, and also other measures that really can't be quantified. Another question that people ask is how much have we spent on this process? It's been going on since 2003, roughly a little over 10 years, and we've spent $14 million just on the studies and NEPA permitting, and of course lawyers and negotiating and other things. So it's a long, fairly costly process, but in the end, I believe that we've come up with a project that meets our water supply needs and also will improve the situation for fishery and aquatic life on the west slope. You can hear Lurleen and Melly's take on that and see if they agree with me about that. Over this process, over this last 10 or 11 years, we have very slowly and methodically worked through a lot of milestones: a draft environmental impact statement, biological opinions, approvals from state, Colorado Parks and Wildlife and CWCB, as well as local permits, a 1041 permit from Grand County. We anticipate that even next week we will be signing a conveyance contract or a carriage contract with the Bureau of Reclamation. Reclamation will issue their record of decision, and then we still need to get a 404 permit from the Corps of Engineers, which includes a 401 certification from State of Colorado Water Quality Control Commission. So we hope we get those last permits in 2015. We'll have a couple years of design and review of that design, and then we hope to begin construction in 2018 of the project. This is my last slide. I apologize for those of you that have seen this again, and it's really just to remind me that I'm at the end, and this is kind of what this game feels like at times, like you're playing a poker game. I think all of us feel like we are at times holding that ace in the hole like this one poker player is, but at times we think the other stakeholders may be holding that. So really all we can do is get together and sit down with all the stakeholders and try and work out an arrangement where we all get our needs met. And I think we've done that with this project. So at this point, I will introduce Lurleen Underbrink-Curran. Lurleen is the county manager of Grand County and has been for the last 10 or 15 years. She's been the lead negotiator on for Grand County on Windy Gap Fermi project, as well as for Grand County with Denver on the Moffett project. She's had a lot of other involvement with water-related issues in the state of Colorado. One thing that is interesting and makes this poker game even a little more difficult is that Lurleen has a degree in psychology and religious studies. So you're negotiating with somebody who maybe understands what you're up to better than you do. So with that, I'll just turn it over to you, Lurleen, and wait for questions later.
Thank you, Jeff. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this presentation. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
We can.
Okay. Just 1 second here. I can't get my project to go. Okay, there we go. First of all, I'm showing you a small map here of where Grand County is located. We are on the Continental Divide. We are the most impacted county in the state for Trans Mountain diversions. We are the home to the Denver Water Moffett Tunnel Diversion Project. We are home to the Bureau of Reclamation CBT project, as Jeff just described. We are also home to Windy Gap and soon to be the Windy Gap Fermi project, as well as the Grand Ditch. We move a great deal of water out of Grand County. In fact, when Chimney Hollow Reservoir and Gross Reservoir expansion are done, 80% of the water that originates above the confluence of the Fraser and Colorado River, which is approximately right here, will leave the county before for Trans Mountain diversion. When the municipal subdistrict and Denver Water came to Grand County and told us that they were proposing these two firming projects, both entities asked us what we wanted. That was a nice gesture, and it kind of set us back on our heels a little bit because we had to stop and think, well, what do we want versus what we needed. And in order to make sure that we were going to take care of ourselves and really get what we needed versus what we wanted, we invested in a stream management plan. Grand County is 14,000 people. We invested over $1 million of taxpayers' money in a stream management plan That stream management plan looked at segments of the river from the top of the Fraser Valley to just before where we leave Grand County. So from here clear to here, we looked at segments of the rivers to determine what was needed in each segment. We discovered that by looking at different life stages of fish, that we were protecting the environment, but we were also protecting water quality, we were protecting municipal and industrial users, we were protecting all kinds of things by just looking at how fish would survive. So when we looked at those segments of the river, we were looking at temperature, we were looking at flow, and we were looking at flushing flow, but we had to balance the environment with municipal and industrial uses. So when we did that, we had to start thinking about not only water for the environment, but how this affected our municipal and industrial water users. When you take more water out of the river, you have less dilution for both wastewater treatment plants, and you need to have more treatment for municipal water supplies. I'm going to go into the Denver Agreement just for a moment. In the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement, we were able to get 375 acre-feet of water for municipal water suppliers in the Fraser Valley from Winter Park to the town of Granby. In addition, we've got 1,000 acre-feet for the environment from Denver Water, which when you put that in the river, it helps with dilution and lifts up the water supply for those water users in Grand County. We have $3.95 million for projects in the Fraser Valley for Winter Park Ski Area and Winter Park Water and Sanitation District. And in addition, Windy Gap, or the municipal subdistrict, is working with wastewater providers that may need to provide heightened treatment above Windy Gap in order to help them mitigate their nutrient load. We also had to look at agricultural uses. You heard Jeff mention Senate Document 80. Senate Document 80, as you know, put the CBT project in place. It's federal legislation. But in that federal legislation, it also had five primary principles, but it also protected what was called the irrigators above Kremling. When the CBT project was contemplated, the irrigators above Kremling flooded with entirely flood irrigation in the spring. When CBT came in place, they replaced flood irrigation with pumps. We now call those irrigators the meadow pumpers. And they installed the pumps and provided electric service for a number of years. The mitigation for the CBT project was Green Mountain Reservoir, which is in Summit County and is quite down the road from where the water is taken out. Williams Fork is the mitigation for the Moffett project, which is again quite down the road from where the water is taken out. When the irrigators pumps were installed, they worked great for a number of years, but as water was taken out of the system, the river has become overwide, it has become quite shallow, and it became more and more difficult for the irrigators to access their water. When Windy Gap was put into place, the municipal subdistrict improved some of those pumps, moved some of the pumps as the river had meandered some and did not provide water in the same place it did when CBT came into place. And in addition, the municipal subdistrict was required to meet certain flows when they were pumping, 90 CFS below Windy Gap, 135 at the confluence of the Williams Fork, and 150 at the confluence of the Troublesome. Even though those flows were met, in the late fall, the irrigators still have a very difficult time accessing their water, as you can see from one of these photos. Grand County got wind of the endangered fish needing water above Granby, or above Grand Junction, sorry. That water had been supplied by Denver Water and Northern for a number of years, but the 5412 or the 10825 water, as we call it, had to find a permanent place for that water to be delivered to the endangered fish. When working on that, Grand County felt that Granby Reservoir was the optimum place for that water to come from. The reservoir was already built. It was a federal reservoir. It was taking care of a federally listed species. And that water was nice and clean and clear, and the Grand Valley liked that. With the help of the River District and the Northern District, that endangered fish water is now coming out of Lake Granby, which helps the flows. in the river all the way through our county. It lifts up the water to those who need to access it, and it's nice, clean water to go to the Grand Valley. That's a perpetual use and part of what was negotiated. We also were very concerned with environmental health of our rivers, and as I said, our stream management plan helped us define what we needed as far as stream temperature. We have algae problems and embeddedness in the river. This you can see a little bit from this photo. These have a very negative impact on the aquatic life. It also increases temperature in the rivers, and we needed to figure out how to take care of that. We also had problems in the Three Lakes area, or in Grand Lake. Grand Lake is Colorado's largest natural lake. We have always stated that Grand Lake was conscripted into the CBT project. The water is pumped backwards from Granby Reservoir through Shadow Mountain Reservoir, which is a very shallow reservoir and acts somewhat like a petri dish, and in through Grand Lake. Over the years, when the pumping occurs, this is the channel coming from Shadow Mountain Reservoir into Grand Lake. This is after a 15-day stop pump, 15-week, I'm sorry, stop pump. And then this is when the pumping just resumed. As you can see, it turns the lake cloudy. We call it green. It sometimes looks pea green. And part of the Windy Gap Firming Project and the necessity of a carriage contract and the fact that pre-positioning was going to occur allowed Grand County to work with the municipal subdistrict, with the Northern District, and with the Bureau of Reclamation on a project to improve clarity in Grand Lake. Grand County and Northwest COG went to the Water Quality Control Commission and got a narrative and numeric standard put in for Grand Lake of 4 meters. The narrative standard is in place, but the numeric standard, we are studying on what is attainable. We have moved that process forward to 2016, are still doing lots of studies, have operational and structural changes that we're looking at, who's going to pay for it, where we get the money, and what kind of federal permits and processes do we have to go through in order to make that happen. In addition, in the Windy Gap process, I talked about embeddedness and problems below Windy Gap. Below Windy Gap, embeddedness and stream temperature and flow has resulted in what appears to be the demise of the stonefly and the sculpin. There is not total empirical information that is the reason, but it is very strong information that Windy Gap has had influence on those species and the aquatic health in that area from Windy Gap down to past the town of Hot Sulphur Springs. As Jeff reported in our IGA, we have $2 million from the Northern District to look at an alternative for bypassing Windy Gap. Department of Natural Resources with the state has put $2 million toward it. This alignment that I'm showing you may not be the alignment that is chosen, but it gives you an idea that we are trying to reestablish the connection from upstream to downstream, to remove the embeddedness, to put flow and temperature curtailment and improvement below there, and hopefully reconnect the channel to let fish migrate and improve the aquatic environment downstream. With all that said, you would say, well, what did we gain by letting both Denver and the municipal subdistrict take more water from Grand County when we are already very limited in our water supply and our impact on the environment? We are going to get a curtailment of pumping when temperatures are exceeded below Windy Gap. We're going to get flushing flows as the stream management plan called for. We are getting storage in Granby Reservoir with our storage that is given us, and that's given Middle Park. We'll have 7,000 acre-feet of storage capability in Granby Reservoir. We have to pay to have the water pumped up after the municipal subdistrict is through taking their water if there's still additional water. Denver Water has given $1 million to help offset that pumping cost. We have the 1,000 acre-feet from Denver and the 5412 water for the endangered fish. So we were able to add the possibility of putting up to 13,000 acre-feet back in the river annually and carrying it over if necessary, and as little as 6,412 acre-feet every year with Denver's 1,000 and the 5412 or endangered fish water. We are hopeful to get the bypass constructed and reestablish the aquatic environment upstream and downstream of Windy Gap. We are in the process of building a recreational in-stream channel diversion below Big Gore Canyon at the very west end of our county, which also has a water right with it. And we are able to use Denver's system to move water up in the Fraser Valley, and that is a really big deal to us. So you say, to what kind of assets did we gain? Jeff gave you the number of money that we got from the value of water, but in assets totally, we feel that we have gained over $150 million in assets. The original Windy Gap permit did not have nearly the things that the IGA had, but that has enabled us to do a lot better things. And the last thing that we gained is learning by doing. It requires Denver, Northern, the Municipal Subdistrict, the River District, us, Trout Unlimited, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife to work together with the water resources that we have, the studies that we are doing. We have formed a relationship where we will all focus on doing what is best for the river and not what we each think is best for us. And I would like to say those relationships, in my opinion, will be the future of Grand County. Without the two firming projects, Grand County loses all the things that I just told you. So with that being said, I would like to introduce Mellie Whiting. Mellie is the legal counsel for Trout Unlimited here in Colorado. She has been a great person to work with and to be a support for all the things that Grand County has done. Trout Unlimited is a huge resource to all that has happened for the Denver project and the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement and the Moffett firming, or the Windy Gap firming project and its IGA. So thanks to Mellie and Trout Unlimited, and here she is.
Mellie, you need to unmute yourself. You need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Lurleen. Really appreciate those words, and I really appreciate both Grand County and the sub-district, as well as Denver Water, and their willingness to negotiate with us and come to an agreement on some of these issues. I'm going to give you a little bit of Trout Unlimited's perspective and just talk a little bit about our involvement in the Windy Gap firming project. For those of you who don't know this, Trout Unlimited is a nonprofit membership organization. Our mission is to conserve, protect, and restore cold water fisheries and their habitat. Excuse me. Our members are mostly anglers and hunters. The headwaters of the Colorado River is home to some of the best wild trout fisheries in the state. Many of the high elevation tributaries support self-sustaining native cutthroat trout populations. And given that value, Trout Unlimited has been working in the area for many years. And we have closely followed Windy Gap firming project and the Moffett project, which both affect that area. I have been personally involved in discussions over both projects over the last 9 years. Just from the outset, Trout Unlimited has never been categorically opposed to Windy Gap firming project, or the Moffett project for that matter. On the contrary, our view has been that if those projects are done in a way that are protective of the environment, you know, those projects coupled with conservation could go a long way in meeting Front Range water supply needs. So over the last 9 years, we've been working hard to make sure that there are measures in place to protect the river from those projects' impacts, not in just categorically oppose those projects. So I'm going to talk about some of the areas of concern. I'm sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. Okay. I'm going to talk about some of the areas of concerns, which Laurelyn has touched on many of them. I think we share a lot of similar concerns in terms of environmental impacts with Greene County. Here's where Windy Gap Reservoir is located. There are 3 major projects that affect the Colorado River below the Windy Gap Reservoir. Here's the Colorado River. The Colorado Big Thompson Project, the Moffett Tunnel Project, and the Windy Gap original Windy Gap project. Currently, those projects take about 60% of the flows of the Colorado River below Windy Gap, as measured below Windy Gap, on an annual average. We are already seeing some impacts in that reach of the river in terms of high stream temperatures, sediment, sediment impacts, both in terms of...
Excuse me, Melly, I'm just going to break in really quickly. I apologize for that, but it looks like we lost your slides, and I wanted to check and see if that was on purpose.
No, you didn't. I'm just, again, I seem to be having some technical difficulties here.
All right. If you want to give us just a second, we can bring the slides up on our computer and switch them for you.
She had them up there for a moment.
Okay. So in any event, do you want me to continue?
Sure. If you want to continue, and we'll just bring the slides up as you go.
Okay. In any event, so the 3 projects currently take approximately 60% of the Colorado River on an annual average, and that's having some impacts: high stream temperatures, sediment accumulation, lack of habitat. We have lost about 37% of microinvertebrate species below the reservoir. The native sculping fish has also been affected. So there's a number of problems. Some of them are possibly tied to Windy Gap Reservoir together with a lack of flows. So once the Moffett enlargement, gross reservoir enlargement, and the Windy Gap firming project come online, we anticipate that about 75% of the Colorado River will be diverted across the divide on an annual average. And we're concerned about what that's going to do to the health of the river. We're also very concerned about the accuracy, I guess, the best word, of modeling. Whether all the models are being done under the environmental impact statement can actually predict what's going to happen when you have so much water taken out of the system. We certainly, when the original Windy Gap project was approved, the loss of microinvertebrate species was not anticipated, and that's what's happened. So for us, monitoring and adaptive management is a very important component. So those are our key concerns, and over the last several years, we've been advocating for specific terms and conditions to address those concerns. We've been talking with federal agencies, with the state, with the county, and with the sub-districts as well, to try to get those concerns resolved. Then in 2000, I don't know if you can get there, but in 2012, the sub-district filed their 1041 application under protest with Greene County, and the Board of County Commissioners held a series of hearings. And it's in that context that Channel Unlimited entered into negotiations with Greene County staff, the River District, the sub-district, of course, and another organization called the Colorado River the Upper Colorado River Association, which is a association of Colorado River landowners. The goal of our discussions was to come up with proposed terms and conditions for the 1041 permit that we could all support, and to offer those to the VOCC jointly for approval. We had a few days of very intense negotiations and came up with an agreement, and that agreement is reflected in the 1041 permit. The 1041 permit includes restrictions on project diversions if stream temperatures are nearing the state stream temperature standards. It allows higher levels of flushing flows every 5 years. Flushing flows are flows, pulses that happen over a period of 3 days or so that help clear sediment from the spawning beds and move larger particles to create more room for microinvertebrates to live and for fish to spawn. There's also a commitment to participate in learning by doing, which Laureline just mentioned. It is the linchpin, I believe, of a lot of what's going on in this area. Learning by doing is a form of monitoring and adaptive management, and it's taking shape. It's taking shape in a very nicely, in a very nice way. So there's also commitment to implement the intergovernmental agreement with Grand County and others that Laureline referred to. That agreement brings things like additional water up to 13,000 acre-feet, like Laureline mentioned, which can be used for deal with temperature issues or deal with additional flush and flow needs and so forth. There is a commitment to participate in the Windy Gap Reservoir Modification Agreement, the bypass agreement, again, which Laureline mentioned, very important. That could result in reinstated about 2 miles of the Colorado River in connecting the Colorado River downstream and upstream of Windy Gap Reservoir. And that's also moving along nicely. We've had meetings about that, and it's moving forward. In addition to that, and this is separate from the 1041 permit, but the sub-district has committed a certain amount of funds to do restoration below the channel restoration below Windy Gap Reservoir. Again, that section of the stream is very wide and shallow, and that affects not only the pumpers' ability to take their water, but also the habitat for the fish. So the idea is that if you narrow and work on that channel, you can make it much more accessible to irrigators, as well as much more fish friendly. So most of these conditions are triggered only if Windy Gap farming project is permitted. So Trout Unlimited believes that if all these measures are successfully implemented, the Colorado River will have the best chance not only to avoid additional impacts from Windy Gap firming, but also to improve current conditions. We really do believe that. Our remaining concern is to make sure that those conditions stick. That means that they are implemented, that the commitments that the sub-district has made carry on over time. There are some items here that will go on for a long time, hopefully. Learning by doing, and some of these, they're not a one-time thing. It's just an ongoing relationship, an ongoing discussion. And so we would like to see provisions in the federal and state approvals that acknowledge things like learning by doing and defer to that local. Learning by doing is managed at a local level. It's not managed by a federal agency. And the state participates, but as a participant, it's not dictating through regulation. So that is something that I think shows a lot of promise and has a very good chance to really work. But what our request is to see that if that process falls apart and it doesn't work for some reason, ceases to function, that there is a federal or state permit backup where there is a mechanism in place where the commitments that the sub-district has made are implemented. Once those things are in place, and we have told this to both federal and state agencies, once that is in place, Trout Unlimited actually supports Windy Gap Firming Project because we believe that everything that comes with it is going to be helpful to even improve current conditions. So just wanted to leave you with a couple of additional thoughts and perspectives out of this 9-year trip, 9-year experience. One of them has to do with timing. Both Moffett and Windy Gap Firming are past the 10-year mark and still going. And that's a very, very long time. That's too long. And I certainly empathize with the project proponents. It's also been a significant drain on our resources and others that are other stakeholders that have been following the projects. So I think that there is a better way to do things. There's got to be a more efficient way to do things. I don't think the answer is to skip steps or to force decisions to be made before the science or the technical information is there, or to bypass public or stakeholder involvement. I think those things tend to lead to more delays, the potential for litigation, and all those contribute to delaying the project even more. I don't think they're helpful. I think that the solution lies on coordinating environmental review early in the process, and you saw Jeff's very, very convoluted graph on how things actually happen, and I saw that, and I totally agree with it. That's pretty much that messy. Well, but everything, all the different arrows and all the different processes seem to be happening toward the end. If a lot of that coordination happens at the very beginning of the process, the federal agencies, the state agencies, the local governments, the stakeholders can get together and agree on this is how we're going to study this. This is how we're going to look at it. This is what we're going to look at. I think a lot of that delay could be avoided. In the case of Windy Gap and Moffett, Windy Gap Firming and Moffett, both cases, I think part of the big delay was having, in the case of Moffett, the Corps is still doing analysis, even 10 years later. They're still doing studies and analysis. I think part of the problem has been that agencies like the Health Department has not came into play kind of late in the process. They don't have the resources to be a part of the process from the beginning. So, you know, providing support to the Health Department to get involved early in the process, I think is very important. And next year, the Health Department, I think, is going to try to get a bill in to get fees partly to pay for 401 certifications and that early involvement, and I would hope that there is support for that. I also think that there are some steps that are time-consuming and not necessary, such as the 122 hearing process before the Wildlife Commission. I think there's some trimming that can happen there. And early involvement and discussion with key stakeholders is, I think, pretty critical, including local governments and organizations like Trout Unlimited that they're committed and involved and committed to try to reach a resolution. That's one thought. The second thought that I have is that agreement is possible, and it is possible for sportsmen's groups or conservation groups to say, yes, we do support this project. I think that's doable. Hopefully, it doesn't have to take 10 years to get there, but it is doable. It is possible. And the last thought that I have is just mostly just make a distinction here. I think that in projects like Windy Gap or the Moffett project, which are identified as IPPs or identified projects and processes in the Colorado Water Plan, I think that there is Toronto Limited and other conservations, not everybody, but there's some level of support for those projects that is done in an environmentally sound way with mitigation that will be helpful to meet, to solve the problem, the gap problem. And so there's some level of support for that. That's very different from the Trans Mountain Diversion projects with capital TMD, where that's still a very, very controversial area and is being handled at the Colorado Water, the water plan process level, and probably a subject of completely different webinar. So I'll leave it there. Well, I'm pretty much done.
Great. Thank you very much, Melanie, and thanks very much to all of our presenters. So like we mentioned at the beginning, we do have some time for questions here, and right now I only see one question, but if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them into the questions pane in your control panel for GoToWebinar, and we will read them aloud. I did want to point out that you should be able in your chat pane to see a survey link, and before you go off and do something else today, if you wouldn't mind filling that out, we would really appreciate your feedback. One other note before we do questions, like we said before, we will send out a recording link for this webinar as well as PDF of all of the PowerPoint slides. And that will come in an email with any CLE forms if you're interested in applying for your CLE credits for the webinar. So to all of our presenters today, our first question is, can someone provide a brief definition for firming in layman's terms? So any of you guys, go ahead.
Well, this is Jeff. I think that's mine that I need to answer, and I get that question very frequently. And there's an engineering term that refers to what we call firm yield. And a firm yield is the yield or the amount of water that you can get reliably year in and year out. So when we started this project, that's what we needed to do, the original Windy Gap project. We had water, a lot of water some years, not very much other years. We wanted to make a firm yield or a reliable yield. So we let the engineers name the project the Windy Gap Firming Project, which our PR people are not happy about and remind us about all the time because we always get that question asked. I hope that answers it, but it's based on the engineering term firm yield.
Great, thank you, Jeff. So our second question is, are other environmental groups on board with the project or just PU? So Melly, that sounds like that's for you.
Yeah, you know, I think that there are a number of groups that are on board. Again, we're all waiting to see what the agencies are going to do. That's the last step, is to include that safeguard that the process will continue, that implementation will happen. But I think that there are a number of groups, not all of them. There's some, I think there's a sharp division between those who feel, you know, we shouldn't have any more projects. We should really, really give conservation a shot. And those who feel that maybe we do need to have some smaller projects, but they need to be done in an environmentally responsible way. And I think that the groups that are supportive feel that what we have worked through with Greene County and the sub-district get us there.
Great, thanks very much, Melly. So our third question is, do you think that the issuance of the 1041 permit broke the logjam to move the project forward?
Well, this is Lurleen. In my opinion, yes, it did. It helped bring TU and some of the environmental people to the table. It had the participation of the River District and Middle Park, which are two very affected entities. And it was a very open process, and to the municipal sub-district's credit, they were willing to participate fully in that. And that transparency and that ability to have those negotiations, or a great deal of them, in the public, and have participation by those who were not in the confidential negotiations, I think opened the door to the federal agencies being able to view this process and project in a different light.
This is Smelly, and I'd like to just adding to that, I just think about this quite a bit, that we were involved since like 2006 in trying to talk and trying to get things resolved, and it's been, it was 6 years until we got to the 1041 permit. Once we got there, I think it took about really 3 days to get things resolved. So I think that by I guess forcing us together in one room and having that end result, that either we agree to something or the DOCC is going to do whatever they're going to do, I think that was a really strong motivator for us to get going on those discussions. And once we did get into those discussions, it got resolved in about 3 days.
Well, and I would add, and I think Jeff can back this up, in the carriage contract negotiations between the Bureau of Rec Northern and the municipal subdistrict, it was referred to more than once. The agreements that had been reached in the IGA in 1041 gave the Bureau of Reclamation the ability to move forward on some things. And Jeff may have a different opinion, but that was voiced a number of times.
Yeah, this is Jeff, and I agree with both of you. I think the 1041 process really did provide a lot of open participation and input, but it also, by having that approval from the local entity, really does help the federal agencies, gives them the ability to move forward with the project with a lot higher comfort level.
All right, thank you, everybody. Our next question is, what is the next big Transbasin diversion out of Grand County after Windy Gap firming?
I will tell you that in the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement and in the IGA with the municipal subdistrict, Grand County will have no further Trans Mountain diversions unless the local Board of County Commissioners approve it, the River District approves it, and it is a shared project of some sort.
Great, thanks very much. Next question, Grand Lake clarity discussion is based on limited historical data, right? People like clear water, fish maybe not so much, right? What is being done to figure this out?
Well, I'll start off. Jeff will add into, there has been literally hundreds of thousands of dollars of studies done. There was one documented clarity of 9 meters in 1954, I believe. When pumping is stopped, it clears up to about 4 meters. That's why we chose the 4-meter number. Under Senate Document 80, I talked about 5 primary principles that were guaranteed to East and West Slope, both with the CBT project. One of those primary principles is the aesthetic value of Grand Lake and Rocky Mountain National Park. That is what Grand County has relied upon and has championed in working on Grand Lake clarity.
And one thing I will add to that, there's a current process going on right now. The State Water Quality Control Commission will have a hearing and address Grand Lake clarity in a standard for Grand Lake clarity in 2016, and there is a Grand Lake clarity stakeholders process going on right now that includes a bunch of stakeholders, including Northern Water, the Bureau of Reclamation, Grand County, and other West Slope groups, trying to grapple with all of the data and information that's out there and trying to come up to some sort of common agreement on what is a logical level of protection or clarity in Grand Lake. And that process, we're hoping, will result in some agreement on what that clarity standard should be in the future.
All right. The next question is, what are the limits to the learning by doing process?
Well, again, this is Lurleen. I don't believe there is a limit to the learning by doing process. Under our two agreements, Denver and Northern and the municipal subdistrict have to stay involved. That is part of our permitting process and contractual agreement also. I believe that process will just improve over time when you establish relationships and you have a common goal in making things better, and you're not pointing fingers or trying to make it someone's fault, but you're trying, all of you are determined to make things better. I don't think there's a limit to what can be done. And Melly and Jeff may have a different take, but that I have really, as Melly said, this was the linchpin for the future, in my opinion, and I don't put any parameters around it. I believe it will only get better and will only do better.
Yeah, this is Melly. I tend to agree with that. I think, again, we were, and I think this is true with most projects coming down the line. We're taking so much water, you're getting so close to the line of this is really going to create problems and really long-term problems. You've got to have that adaptive management aspect of it. We frankly were hoping for an absolutely open-ended monitoring, adaptive management. The concern, obviously, from Jeff's side and obviously for whoever is proposing a project is that open liability. So there is right now a certain amount of money that has been committed and a certain amount of water that has been committed. But there is, as Lurleen says, there's also a strong language of a commitment to move forward. So if we run out of money, we need to figure out what to do together. We need to figure out if we need more money, where that's going to come from. That's something we're facing certainly with the bypass agreement, the bypass project. The money is probably not going to be enough. And so we're going to have to go out there and apply for grants and seek money for, it's a very worthwhile project, and we do that together.
Very quickly, I agree with that. There, right now, on paper, there's a limit on resources, but as a group, I think we all have a desire to maintain a healthy ecosystem there, and we may all have different motivations for why we want to do that, but there is a strong relationship, and I think as we move forward, we'll all try to do, come to some agreement on what needs to be done and move forward with that.
All right, I don't see any other questions in the questions pane right now, so we can go ahead and wrap up the webinar. Thank you, everybody who participated today, and thank you again to our presenters. We really appreciate your time and everything that you put into this. Again, we will send out an email with follow-up information, so look for that in your inboxes. Take a look at the survey. We'd appreciate your feedback, and let us know if you have any other questions or comments. We hope that you enjoyed the webinar today, and we'll look for the third webinar in the Transbasin Diversion series, which will be on January 8th, and that is Changing Perceptions of Transbasin Diversion. So you can check out information for that on both the Foundation's website and the Water Congress website, and that is also where you can link to register. So thanks very much, everybody. Did any of our presenters want to add anything else today?
Not me. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. We're going to go ahead and shut everything down.